First of all, thank you very much, Shan, for your kind introduction and for inviting me to speak at this wonderful occasion and venue. Given our subject today, it's worth noting that when we hear the word enlightenment, it's inevitably preceded by one of two adjectives, Scottish or French. Two nations with such a long shared history and alliance. And presumably that has fed into the choice of this as a venue. Either that or somebody likes croissants. I don't know specifically why. My name's Bruce Fummey. Obviously, just like Shan, Bruce isn't actually my real name. That's not because of my ethnicity. It's just that when you've got a criminal record like mine, an alias is always a good thing. I imagine I was invited today because I've got a YouTube channel, Scotland History Tours, as mentioned. I go round, I suppose, the world now, telling stories and jokes about Scottish history. But when I walk on stage, I'm not always what people expected. Yeah? Now, it used to be easy. I would explain that my mum is Scottish and my dad is from Ghana in West Africa, and I'm the finest comedian on the Afro-Celtic comedy circuit, and I would answer their questions. It was always the same questions. What's a Scotsman got in his sporran? What's a Scotsman got under his kilt? And if he's half African, how does he hide it? It was always the same questions. Occasionally people would ask, did you experience any challenges growing up a mixed-race kid in Scotland in the 60s and 70s? The people that asked that question were always the people that never tried playing reggae music in the bagpipes. But I did my best to answer it. What I'm saying is, I used to be funny, now I talk about history. And it goes without saying that I'm fiercely proud to be Scottish. Because Scots gave the world everything, didn't we? Scots invented the modern world. We gave the world the telephone, the television. We gave the world tarmac roads. We gave the world penicillin. Okay, we gave them venereal disease in the first place, but that's not the point. It also goes without saying that I, like everyone else, get wrapped up in identity from time to time. I grew up a mixed-race kid in Perth. My mum was a single mother, living on benefits with 4 brown children. And however challenging you think that might be in 2021, this is 2025, isn't it? However challenging you might think that is in the 21st century, let's not get too specific with the dates, ladies and gentlemen. However challenging you think that might be in the 21st century, it was a bigger challenge in the 60s and 70s. Having said that, I was fortunate to live in a time where university education was grant funded. I got an education. And later in life, as a physics teacher who'd gone on to be a financial advisor, married to a physiotherapist and living in a detached house, my own son asked me, "Dad, are we working class or middle class? Are we working class or middle class?" I said, "Son, you know your granddad is from Ghana in West Africa?" He said, "Yes, I do." I said, "Do you know that back in the day, people from that area were ripped from the land, put on boats to cross the Atlantic in inhumane conditions to the Americas to work under the lash and the searing sun as slaves? Our ancestors sold them to the Americans. We're aristocracy, son." Now, in my introduction, I've surreptitiously hidden 3 jokes. And at one point, you might have felt national pride. And that was the correct response. If at one point, you felt a little bit uncomfortable, then that was the correct response. If you felt there were challenging ideas about identity, morality, and responsibility that need some thought, then that too was the correct response. But the same 3 things might be said about the Scottish Enlightenment. As is mentioned, a recent survey tells us that 56% of Scots had never heard of the Scottish Enlightenment. 56%. 24% had heard of it, but didn't really know what it was. 80%. That's a shockingly high figure, isn't it? But if you ask the average person on the street, they might not be able to define, label, or describe the Scottish Enlightenment, but they know that Scots invented the modern world. They know that Scots invented everything. Things that have changed the world. Things that have been adopted around the world. Steam engines, bicycles, fridges, contour lines. We've also invented things that never took off outside Scotland, like square sausage. How did that happen? Adam Smith gave the world the wealth of nations. Jock McTaggart, the butcher, invented square sausage. I know which one I want to pick up when I've got a hangover on a Sunday morning. Sometimes we choose the wrong heroes. David Hume was probably our most famous Enlightenment philosopher. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know a lot about philosophy. I mean, I know the pithy aphorisms. Like, if you seek happiness as you walk through life, wear comfortable shoes. I don't know who said that, but they're wise words. I do know that it was Socrates who said, the one thing I know is that I know nothing. Great philosopher, but clearly couldn't count. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish existentialist philosopher, said life is lived forwards, but understood backwards. That was a truly insightful thing to say, because a lorry reversed over him and killed him. David Hume, that was a better joke than you gave it credit for, ladies and gentlemen. David Hume was the most celebrated of our Scottish Enlightenment philosophers. Hume, as mentioned, was a strong empiricist, believing that knowledge is ultimately derived from sensory experience. Yeah, clearly that was a bit abstract for some of the group. Okay, let me explain it in a way that's got a reaction in the past. I explained it this way. Hume believed that it's not reason but emotions or passions that are the primary drivers of human behavior and moral judgments. Moral judgment isn't based on reason, but sympathy, sensation, and our capacity to share the feelings of others. We don't do the thing that's rational. We do the thing that feels good. And my wife said, I don't give a shit, get off the phone and come home writing it from the pub right now. My wife found Hume's philosophy somewhat abstract as well. I told her, you don't understand David Hume. She said, oh yes, I do. David Hume was a racist. Well, that rocked me back in my heels, didn't it? Aye, she said. David Hume, in his Of National Characters in the 1700s, wrote, I am apt to suspect the Negroes to be naturally inferior to the whites. There scarcely ever was a civilized nation of that complexion, nor even individual, eminent in action or speculation. Now, I already knew that there were Scots during the Enlightenment period who benefited from and sought to justify transatlantic slavery on that basis. But Enlightenment Scots did more horrific things even than that. Some of them took elocution lessons so they could speak with an English accent. Aye, how new broon coo, ya treacherous southern quisling. During Black History Month in 2023, Aberdeen University asked me to give a talk about their links to slavery. Now, I wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea. Every Black History Month, somebody asks me to give a talk. And it raises all sorts of questions. My mum was white. My dad was black. Which makes it difficult for me to know who to support when I watch my mates playing chess. Is Black history my history, but not yours? If I'm culturally Scottish, can I still talk about Black history? What if the black guy's English? As a genetic hybrid, does that mean I don't have any history? Does history have a colour? If a Scotsman, a Nigerian, and a Red Indian walk into a bar, would that be an off-colour joke? If a Red Indian marries a Chinese, would their children march on the 12th of July and sing about the sash their father wore? Because yellow and red make an orange man. It doesn't matter, okay? In my off-colour joke, who pictured the Scotsman looking like me? Or like Saba? Yeah? And why is it that they so often want you to do Black history talks about Scotland and slavery? Is enslavement how black history is defined? Was David Hume right? As it was, the folks from Aberdeen said that they'd send me over some information, and I said that I'd look at it whilst preparing my excuses. But when it came, what intrigued me was how much messier the legacy of slavery in Scotland's history is. It's not black history. It's not white history. I saw connections to my own family. It's our history. I read about Gilbert Ramsay from Fingen in rural Aberdeenshire. After studying at Marischal College, he became an Episcopal minister and went to the West Indies. There, he married 2 plantation widows. He wasn't a bigamist, they died. The point is that he owned and managed hundreds of slaves whilst ministering the gospel of the Church of England. Now, we might find the ethics of that difficult, if not incongruous. On his death, his will dictated that these enslaved people should be sold and the proceeds should be used to fund a school at Fingen and bursaries and endowments at Aberdeen University. Now, one of these bursaries was only for those who, like him, were named Ramsay. And years later, another Ramsay, who coincidentally had grown up in Fingen as well and benefited from the school built with Gilbert Ramsay's money, went on to further benefit from a Ramsay bursary. After he graduated, he also went to the West Indies and profited on plantations from enslaved people. And the cycle continued. I also learned of Olaudah Equiano, an Igbo boy in what we'd call Nigeria, enslaved as a child in West Africa, trafficked across the Atlantic to the Caribbean, then Virginia, and then to Britain before achieving freedom and becoming a writer and abolitionist campaigner. His autobiography, the interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah Equiano, was one of the first books published by a black African in Europe and became a bestseller. Of course, few of the enslaved Igbo people managed to escape as he did. Over 100,000 were taken. And in Aberdeen, I saw records of an estate manager in Jamaica writing back to his plantation owners, the Gordons of Aberdeenshire, telling of Igbo women that he'd added to the stock. Stock whose unpaid work had allowed them to build the very grand Cairness house near Fraserburgh. Now, when I saw a picture of that grand house, it started to ring bells. You see, my wife's family are from Fraserburgh. And the first time she took me to visit her aunt and uncle, the house that they'd refurbished and lived in was the gatehouse to Cairness House. So ultimately, it wasn't just the Gordon family who benefited from enslaved Igbo people, it was my in-laws. Now, I've got a complicated family. All you need to know is that when my mum and dad split, my dad went back to Ghana and remarried a local woman, so that I have sisters who are entirely West African, at least genetically, because one of them now lives in Aberdeen. So I took her to the Mitchell Hall in Marischal College to show her the stained glass window dedicated to the plantation owner, alumni and benefactor Gilbert Ramsay. I took her Nigerian husband, an Igbo man. I explained the story of the man whom the crest in the window represented. I told of the 100,000 Igbo people who were enslaved. And when he considered that the difference between him and them was nothing more than a date of birth, well, you can imagine. I then pointed out that my West African sister, who's a medical doctor in Aberdeen, occasionally lectures at Aberdeen University, thus benefiting in part from endowment given by Ramsay and others down the years. Not only that, but my Igbo brother-in-law's job is to recruit international students to come to Aberdeen to study. Their son, my nephew, goes to a nursery exclusive to employees of Aberdeen University. Centuries after Gilbert Ramsay's death, my nephew is benefiting from the endowment every bit as much as children of Fingen in their community past and present. In fact, given that my brother-in-law's family were some of the Igbos who survived to tell the tale in West Africa, was that because they were fortunate escapees or complicit collaborators? Maybe they were aristocracy. If so, how can I judge them? I'd taken the train to Aberdeen. Now let me explain what I mean by that. When slavery was abolished, the compensation was paid out to slave owners in Britain for the loss of their property. We know from the compensation records that the Enlightenment Edinburgh Newtown was full of people who had never and would never see the West Indies, but owned Caribbean slaves like shares on the stock market. The abolition compensation scheme was a bigger bailout than the bank bailout of our 21st century credit crisis. Indeed, it took until 2015 before the British government paid back all the debt for the compensation paid out. So how does that relate to my train journey? Well, what did Victorians do with their cash compensation for loss of human assets? They invested in new assets. Many invested in the new technology of the day, railways. The bridges that were built, the tunnels that were dug, the track that was laid, much of the money came from slavery compensation. People don't think about that. Every time you get a train from Edinburgh to Aberdeen and benefit from the infrastructure supporting it, you, like me, indirectly benefit from historic slavery. And every time you use a smartphone, you probably benefit from present-day slavery somewhere in the world. So how do we judge David Hume and those who lived in his time, when prejudgment is the definition of prejudice? We can only imagine what it would have been like to have lived in Enlightenment Edinburgh. An 18th century English visitor famously posited that he could stand at the Market Cross and in half an hour shake by the hand 50 men of genius. He could probably also shake the hand of 50 who owned enslaved people. He could shake the hand of many more who benefited from enslavement. But then again, you could do that out there today. We don't like to think about that. We don't feel like bad people, so we don't think we are. Because when we think, we don't do so rationally, but with our emotions. So a philosopher once said. The men of genius who walked up and down this street are our heroes. But we don't think about our heroes, we feel them. I don't know about you, but when I think about Scotland, I think with my heart. And when I think of the impact of the Scottish Enlightenment, that heart swells with pride. But the rational part would say that there were uncomfortable compromises along the way. We can list the things that Scotland gave the world. We can sing the songs of Scotland, never thinking of our complicity. We can debate for hours the rights and wrongs and never be finished the tug-of-war between emotion and reason. And that's why right now, I'm not entirely sure what I'm meant to do. It was at that point that my wife said, I told you what to do. Get your arse back home before I throw your clothes in the street. As I say, I don't think she cares for philosophy much. But she'd heard of the Scottish Enlightenment. I suppose what I'm saying is that we have a wonderful history, a wonderful heritage to celebrate, but it's not uncomplicated. The thing that people get wrong when they talk about black and white is that nothing ever is. The Scottish Enlightenment is painted in shades of grey, ladies and gentlemen.